Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. Today, our guest is Erin Brophy. Erin is the niece of Colleen Brophy, who is the co-founder of Ivy House, which is where Corrine stays and does all her spiritual work or meditation, teaching, yoga classes, life coaching, literally everything you could possibly need to get on that self-inquiry journey.
Yeah. Erin came to Ivy House via her aunt, and she stayed here, and Colleen introduced her to some books that she discusses, and this was a great conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, you and she really, connected. You had a lot of commonalities in the way you think and your journey, and Erin's just really raw and honest about her struggles and her challenges and her awakening to her spiritual journey. It was a really fun conversation. I thought it was great. And I feel like it'll help. It might help a lot of people. Who knows? Because I think Erin really articulated some challenges that many people go through.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely shared a lot of those similarities in our experience, and just kind of the madness of the spiritual journey. So I think you and I are both pretty excited for people to hear this one. Hey, Erin Brophy, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, man, I'm doing good. Corinne and I were just chatting for a little bit about the crazy times. So we're going to just, we'll get to all that. We're just jumping into this. So we'll start off with kind of the question we're asking everybody, and what this podcast is about is turning points in your life, whether it be one turning point or multiple turning points. She keeps disappearing.
I can hear the chewing happening still.
He found something else. I just grabbed it.
So Erin is dealing with her dog in the room too, which is perfectly fine, no problems. Yeah, so that's such a hard transition from dog chew toy to the most spiritual turning point in your whole entire life.
That's a great question. And it was a very vivid, sharp turn, I would call it. It wasn't really that vague. So I think the moment when I really realized like childhood beliefs and everything that was in my head was not the authority, I was laying in my apartment in Pasadena, which was tiny. It almost felt like a prison of sorts on a lot of levels. Even though it wasn't, I was there, on my free will. But I was flipping through the beginning of a book, and I wasn't really reading it. My mind was racing as it always was. And I was just listening like I was always doing, thinking to myself, I've really been I'm stuck with a pretty gnarly like track, it's constantly going. I have to listen. I either just like quiet it or I, am white knuckling, hanging on to it for dear life. But this is just the voice that I always have to listen to. But then that morning when I was laying in my apartment, I had stopped drinking a few weeks prior, but I really was only without alcohol. I hadn't made any kind of transformation, like personally or spiritually. And I remember just something washing over me, something in the air or, in the wind that was like, you don't need to wait for any authority or any permission or any sign or scroll or text message or email that says you can think differently. And I was actually waiting for that on a very literal level. Like I was like, there's a bird's going to drop a scroll with a ribbon. I thought I'd get some kind of email that was like, okay, you've suffered long enough. Now you can join the rest of the world. Like it was like looking through glass at people who lived what I thought was comfortably, normally, in their own minds. And then there was me just pressed against it, wondering how they got there. And I don't know, it was sometime in May in 2016. if that, if anything cosmically was going on, maybe we can, scroll back and line it up. But that was literally just, it was the first time that the thought occurred to me that what I was thinking was something I was sort of choosing to think, and that I had the capacity to change it.
Gotcha. Now, was your upbringing a large part of what was the authority, your mind becoming the authority for you to break, like waiting for that authoritative voice to break through? Was that something that kind of generated from your family lifestyle, or like you said, were you kind of choosing, or is that a comfort zone for you to be in that authoritative?
It was definitely both. I think it started at home. It started with what I heard and what I saw and what I just sort of embraced. I was like, okay, you got to be within this box. You don't want to step over this line. You don't want to say that. You don't want to be to this. You don't want to be not enough that. And it was very much, I feel like, when I was young, I was like, oh, I had a lovely childhood. And now I'm like, no, it was pretty traumatic emotionally, because I didn't realize that everything I believed was like so subconscious back then. And just got like stuck down in those like deepest levels. And then I think it became a comfort where I was like, okay, it's easier for me to just remember what, that time I was scolded for this, and then to just, hide behind that for the next decade. So I think it was definitely both. And I cannot, every day now, presently, I'm shocked by more of what I realize is from my childhood.
There's a lot of shit, there's a lot of programming. Corrine and we've talked at length about this, and Corrine has, incredible insight, both generally, but then also in my life. She's been, a huge supporter for my spiritual growth, and has kind of guided me through a lot of my own, personal baggage, a lot, if you can see her. She's just, so I've had a similar experience of realizing the depth of programming upon programming, the double, triple, quadruple layers of things that you don't even realize guide and manage your decisions, your outlooks, your beliefs. Everything just seems to come from, and again, like, I'm sure your childhood was very safe. I'm sure you had, all your needs met. However, there's a spiritual being in there too, and a lot of times those family lifestyles don't overlap very well.
Totally, exactly.
And so that was before you came to the Ivy House, I think, right? That you had that happen.
Yes, it was in that phase. I sort of feel like it was a year of my life where I was living in Pasadena alone, and I had been at the Ivy House, or was about to go, and it was all, that turn was definitely in and around like a 2-month window. And I also remember I was at the Ivy House in the kitchen, and Colleen asked, "Who is Erin?" And I was like so confused by that question, because I was like, first of all, I don't have an answer. And second of all, how could I? Like, I was dumbfounded. Like, I had no idea. And not only did I not have the idea, but I didn't think I had any control. I was like, part of me was like, who cares? Like, I was like, so, like, what kind of question is that? Like, what kind of like voodoo, question is that? That was my first thought. And that question, I think about how I felt that day, and it was like a cartoon. Like, my eyes just got huge. And ever since then, it's like, that's really the only question that's ever mattered. And yet when I was asked it, I was like, this is going to be probably too much, I will never figure this out. But now I think about how ever since I've been asked that, I'm still asking it, and I'm still kind of, setting things down that aren't myself. And so that was another question that I'll never forget, just launching me into a whole new dimension, honestly.
And just real quick, just for the viewers or listeners, Colleen, you mentioned Colleen, that's your aunt.
Yes.
Colleen, who is also a huge fixture and founder of Ivy House, for those who don't know. So just so you know who we're talking about, asked the question. It was not some stranger named Colleen. It was
right.
a very intellectual, powerful person in general, but then also a family member and aunt of yours, who is basically looking at you and coaxing out that question of, who are you?
Exactly. She gave me John Cabot Zinn's Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I read that at the Ivy House, and it made so much sense because I was constantly in the past or the future. And she also gave me Untethered Soul, which, I can't be further than 3 feet from a copy of that at any given moment, because I have to I would just open a page, or I honestly have the cards right here because
nice.
I use these. It just made so much sense to me. And it's, there's so many variations of that message, but it really is just the core is the mindfulness, and that your mind's going to try to trick you all day long. And some days I'm incredibly weak and I'm like, take it away. And other days I'm like stone, nothing gets through. But it definitely is better to not listen. I've gotten that far, but I'm amazed at how much convincing I need, because the mind is still like, hi, whenever I'm getting
Well,
going.
the metaphor I came up with in the yoga class the other day, because so many of us were glued to the news so much this week, even more than normal, right? And so I feel like we all have a news station in our head all the time. And when you go to the news at the top of the hour, there's maybe 3 minutes of a 22-minute newscast that's maybe new information. And the rest of it is a projection of what they think and an opinion of what they think and how everybody else thinks. And that's exactly what happens in our head constantly. We've got a news station happening in our head all the time. And
Yes.
And once you become aware that you are not your thoughts, and you had that awakening in your apartment, then all of a sudden, it takes a while to unstick that, because it's like Velcro. It's but you've believed your thoughts your whole life. So that's the process of turning down the news station a little. The news station's going to still be going on. It's still going to have opinions. The committee's going to be there. It's going to have a dissertation. But what happens, I'd like for you to speak about what's been happening for you on your journey. But for me, what's happened is just, I don't believe my thoughts anymore at all. I only trust the now.
That's so smart. And it's such a news station. I think that metaphor is so accurate, because I will even convince myself, you've got to tune in because you need to know what's going on. And it's exactly the way I interpret.
Right. You got to tune
thoughts.
in here. You got to know what's going on. You got to get this figured out. You got to judge that. You've got to plan that. You've got to, and what I tell my coaching clients is, you need 15% of that. 15% to plan your week or your month or a holiday, or pay your bills, or figure out something, creative solution to a problem. But then that leaves 85% of being in the now.
Yes, that is such a good, and I love it sort of quantified like that, because I am that person who's who will sort of, use the excuse, like I should probably listen to more than I need to. Like I'll say, oh, but how am I going to get things done? Or, but 15% even sounds like, that's all you would need maximum. Because the thing that keeps me most on track, and I had a journal specifically dedicated to times where I would need to write down when I was proven wrong, when my thoughts said one thing and then the life actually showed me something entirely different. And it would be little things like, I think my roommate is pissed because we had a thermostat war last night. And then I would write down the next day when there was no issue. Anytime that my thought was wrong, I forced myself to sit down and write it so I could start to see how wrong my thoughts always were. And now I'm in that place where I'm not writing it down as much, but I'm letting myself sort of free fall in my actual life and just turning the thought off, saying, okay, I'm not going to try to wrap this up with a bow and pretend I have this person figured out, or pretend like, my thoughts can control any outcome, whatsoever. And it's definitely wobbly, but it's more fun than suffering all the time. Listening to the thoughts and then letting that guide my day or my week or my fiscal quarter even. Sometimes it can take over. It's dangerous.
It is dangerous. The dangerous mind. It's like the wrong station is happening. Yeah. My BFF, we were on the phone the other night, and it said she'd had a rough night a couple of nights ago. She said, I just was, thinking about a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, and notice, isn't it interesting that your situation hadn't changed about anything? It's just your mind started going down a tunnel and you decided to follow it and believe it. And that's such a beautiful practice. Yeah. How did you come up with that idea to write down? It's awesome.
Oh, that's so kind. I think I honestly was just so annoyed with myself for always believing that the worst scenario. Yes. I was like, when are you going to learn that people don't hate you? They're not upset. You didn't do something wrong, especially because one of my childhood beliefs was like, if I do one thing wrong, I'm out. Like, that's it. Goodbye. So I would have a small miscommunication or a very, very relatively speaking, minor disagreement. And I was like, well, I'll never speak to that person again. And I have to every day practice just letting go of those narratives. And I remember just being so sleep deprived from narrating and catastrophizing that one day I was like, even if you proved yourself wrong 3 times, that might be enough to start convincing you. And then the list got so long, and I loved reading it because then I was like, wow, you're always wrong when you think about those stories. And then I finally didn't have, I wouldn't write on because I was like, there's no need. Why don't you just live this? But whenever I get shaky and I'm like, no, I'm going to listen to the thoughts, I will go back and write down. Turns out I was wrong when I thought that this person was mad. I'll go a day and a half without texting with a friend and I'm like, okay, they must hate me. And it's like, okay, what? So I have to write down, so-and-so doesn't hate me. We hung out today. Next time, what are you going to do? And then this brings up kind of another point that I think is worth mentioning. For many, many years, I felt like I had the awareness of what I was doing, could see it all, and, could analyze everything I did and every thought and trace it back. But then I stopped and couldn't manage differently or actually reprogram. I just saw it all. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with all this? Like, I see what I'm doing, but I could not step into that, like, now actually surrender. I think it was like a 5 year period of just seeing it, getting it, reading every self-help book, knowing how to label it, understanding it from like a, psych perspective, a lot of just traditional therapy, every practice under the sun. But then I was stopping at the point where I had to actually trust anything.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, you're really like, you should probably move into phase 2 now and start like actually seeing if it will work to your benefit to just live more presently and authentically. And I can speak from just, dipping a toe. I really wouldn't even say I've gone that far, but it works. It actually feels so much better.
Well, and that's you're kind of bringing up the point of, the 5 years of intellectualizing the spiritual practice.
Yes.
And it's funny because, you said 5 years. I just recently discovered with Corrine, actually, that I have done about a 10, maybe 12-year process of unraveling all that is me in very small steps for a very long time, thinking that I'm getting somewhere, to the point where I've intellectualized this whole spiritual practice to such a degree that I get it. Oh, I get it, man. I understand all of it. It's all there. I can see the connections between the scriptures and this from any spiritual book. And then the realization that I intellectualize it and understand it in an outward form, very similar. Our minds work very similar. The way you talk about analyzing, and you can almost predict. You can predict outcomes to certain degrees because of how much you're paying attention. You're like, well, that must be awareness. I'm so fucking aware. I can see this. I'm awake and I'm aware of all this stuff and I can predict it. And yet that intellectualizing it, even spiritually intellectualizing it, becomes the self-preservation that the ego starts to rebuild itself on until finally, and my come to Jesus, I suppose, was realizing how full of shit I really am, and how much of who I am or pretend to be or think I am or project onto other people or have other people project onto me and blah, 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 and worry about what they went through the same thing. I mean, somebody doesn't call me back for a day and a half, and because I'm the only one in my world, I'm thinking that I must be problematic for this person because there couldn't be a million other variables that would stop that person in their fucking life from communicating with me. And yet I'm not narcissistic, right? I'm not narcissistic thinking I'm the most important thing in every person's life. And then you realize just how much of it is story, how much of it is a lot. And Corrine finally just told me, that you're just so a lot.
As I'd sit there and listen to him, tell it, because he's very philosophical, he's very well spoken, and he knows a lot about a lot of different things, but he makes it so like it's like makes it so difficult. Like it's just simple, and then like he has a whole philosophy around an idea, and I'm just sitting there listening, and my eyes like are going, oh yeah, it's just a lot. It's like it doesn't have to be that complicated.
But then it gets to exactly what you did. I'm going to let you talk because I just rambled but exactly what you said is, okay, now I've intellectualized it. Now I know what to do. I know the psych behind it, but now I have to understand it and experience it. And that's bringing it into your life. So what has that been like, bringing that into your life lately?
I am just, first of all, so glad you just said what you said and that it's recorded, because I'll be listening to this over and over because it's exactly it. I've never heard it said that way, like intellectualizing a spiritual practice. And that's what I did and all I thought that I needed to do. And then I kind of, like Corrine was just saying, it felt like a lot. It was exhausting.
Yeah.
I was like, I would go through phases where I'd read too many books and then be like, okay, like this is just it just hurts my brain. And it has only been truly the past, this is going to seem like you guys are going to be, why have we let her speak? But like the last 6 months, I would say, of my life, have I realized that all I was doing was intellectualizing it and learning about it and observing it and knowing it, but not doing it. And so I really had another sort of like moment wash over me recently. Now I'm in Austin. I've moved a few times, always think like, the next place I get, everything will click. I never really does. It turns out John Cabot Zinn was right. Wherever you go, that's really where you are. But I just one night was laying in bed again, and I was like, I am really exhausted by all the noise and what I tell myself. And I said truly to myself, this year, 2020, has already been sort of insane on a lot of levels. You only have 2 more months. What if in this year, what if you just like totally surrendered and just saw where it took you in 2 months? And then if it doesn't go well, we can go back to overthinking in 2021. Like, I've given myself a few weeks to test drive this, because I'm sadly not convinced, even though the past 5 years I've like dedicated my life to learning it. And B, I thought, what worse could happen in 2020? And why don't you just use, not that I've actually really, really enjoyed how introspective and sort of hibernating I've been able to be in COVID. I've learned a ton about myself and everything, but I just thought, I'm very time oriented and to a detriment. I'm constantly looking at clocks and times and what was I doing a year ago. And so for me, giving myself 2 months to just practice surrendering and seeing how it goes is like quite literally where I'm at today. Like, something happened today where I'm like, just let it go, see what happens. They don't wrestle with this anymore. Like, it's November 9th. You have, a little under 8 weeks to just free fall. So just let yourself, because I bet you I'm going to realize, I hope, that it's so much easier. And I don't need to waste so much energy, like holding on to like every story so tightly, because I write them before in my head, before there's any real life. And then I'm so confused why life doesn't match up with the story. And then I lose track of who I am because I've already written the story, but then life goes a different direction. And it's actually impossible to be authentic, I've realized, when I am constantly narrating. And I am a writer, so it's hard not to like be very hyperbolic and dramatic. And I'll meet someone and tell everyone about them, and then a week later they'll disappoint me and I'll be like, what a tragedy that was. Like, and it's like, can they just, it's so volatile, because I like that kind of story. Probably because I've been living my own life that way. And I find so much comfort in people's stories where they are long and boring and nothing dramatic happens, because I've always wanted to be someone who just is able to surrender to just a more present existence and not cling to these like highs and lows that I punctuate intentionally, because I'm like, this has to be something or it's nothing. I'm very dramatic. So it's been truly exhausting, and now I'm in a free fall until January.
This is 1st. The new narrative. The new narrative is to free fall.
Exactly. And there it is again. It's like, now I'm like, oh no, you got to free fall, instead of just taking each literal moment, like piece by piece.
But that'll be a really good mindful practice for you, I imagine, because and one of the stories that I'm going to call you out on is you said, I can't believe you guys are going to even let me speak when I've only come to this realization 6 months ago. That literally doesn't have any bearing on anything in life or specifically in this conversation, because the idea is not to find the most experienced meditators, the most experienced whatever. Really, the goal is Corrine felt like you had a profound perspective and a great way of putting your life, and that has value in and of itself. So I'm going to call you out on devaluing thinking that that has any bearing on the value that you're bringing to this conversation, because already you have brought so much insight. You've already explained how you created your own mindful practice that was catered to you specifically,
Beautiful.
that you knew was going to work for you. The journaling, I mean, that is essentially the new regiment that you need to have to create new pathways in your brain to overcome those old patterns. I think, and I was under the misconception for a very long time that, well, if I just stop doing this, I can do something different. Or if this happened, then I could have this new experience. But you have to have a mindful practice to bring you out of one phase and into another phase. And eventually, I imagine the mindful practice, and Corrine is going to take over here and probably expound on this, because she has great ways of looking at all this. But what it does is it brings you out of that patterned state that you are stuck in, and allows for new ways of being, for new ways to have freedom through expression in life, because you do have to be in life, so you have to have some sort of a pattern of mindfulness.
Even just life. You being aware, Erin, now becoming aware, this is such a beautiful thing, that you are sort of addicted to the drama a little bit, and just being aware of that, that's key. And I want to share, if you don't mind, because I love teaching in stories forms sometimes. And so there's the pizza theory. And so, do you like pizza? Okay, so I love pizza too. And so if you've ever been so hungry and you order a pizza and it only takes 15 or 20 minutes to get there, but it seems like an hour to get there. So you're anticipating the pizza, you can't wait till it, and you pay the delivery guy and you bring it in and you're so hungry, you bite in, and if you don't burn your mouth on the first bite, it's like the best pizza you have ever had in your entire life. That first bite and that first piece is like you've never eaten pizza before, right? And by the second piece, it doesn't taste quite as good. It's still good. And by the third piece, it's just tastes like what? Yeah, it's the same pizza, and you're not full yet, because that's only taken 6 or 7 minutes. So the pizza theory is that it's not the pizza, it's your awareness, it's your mindfulness. When you bite into that first bite, you're not thinking about what show you're going to watch on TV. You're not thinking about paying your bills. You're not thinking about how much you paid for the pizza. You're just totally focused on the pizza. By the second and third piece, you're thinking about what you want to watch on Netflix, and maybe that pizza, maybe, they forgot the pepperoncinis or whatever it was. And it's the same thing with extreme sports. It's the same thing with falling in love the first couple of months. You think it's the person, but it's your awareness. When you're making love with somebody the first 10 times, you're not thinking about bills. You're not wanting it to be over. You're not you're not do all the things that people do after they've been together for a while, right? You're just totally focused and engorged in that person, in every aspect of them. And it's the awareness. It's not the sex for the first time. It's the awareness of it. It's the same with the extreme sports. I learned that actually when I went scuba diving years ago. I was like, thank God my yoga breathing, because I was like, if I don't focus on my breath, I'm gonna die. I'm 50 feet down under in the ocean, and I've got to breathe really calmly and smoothly. And it was totally present moment mindfulness. And when you're skiing down, you're a big skier, when you're going down a black diamond with your dad, especially, who's the most amazing skier and crazy person ever, if you don't pay attention and are full, if you're thinking about lunch, you will break a leg, right? You've got to fully pay attention. So anyway, that's my pizza theory.
Oh, I love that. It's so true though. And it really is, it's so hyped up in our minds, but the the beginning of it, you have to focus. And that happens to me too. Even I noticed, like when I run, if my mind wanders for a second, I literally fall. I will trip and, scrape myself up because I come out of what I'm doing. And it's always thinking about like an appointment I need to book or a bill. Like we say those things, but it always actually is those things, like a literal bill or a dentist appointment. Or it's, I'm replaying conversations or having conversations in my head that I will never have in my real life. Oh my word. I just like the hours. I did start realizing that the other night. I was like, you just waste a lot of time, like thinking about like conversations. Like, where are these taking you? Like they're literally going nowhere. And then I think another thing that started to excite me is I was like, because when I overthink things, then there's no room to be surprised. There's no room for there to be actually something like more explosive and exciting. And I've already written people and activities and things off. I'm like, oh no, it's going to go like this. They're like that. I'm like this. And it's actually tragic because it becomes so, it feels like just a stale kind of stiff way.
It's not real
to exist.
When you're
Right.
Having a conversation in your head for the fifth time, it's not reality. It's your imagination. And so my friend Sarah is a great meditation teacher, and she talks, and this is kind of a mindfulness thing. So you have a circle, and it's like being in the present moment is in the center of the circle. When you're in the now, when you're in the pizza, the first bite of pizza, you're in the center of the circle. When you're to the right of the circle, you're thinking about the future. To the left of the circle, you're thinking about the past. North is thinking about others, and south is thinking about your self-image. So the longer time you spend on the outer circle, the less happy you will be, and the more you're actually living in your head and in your thoughts and not in the present moment. And so it's again, that 15% is okay to be in there, but you want to more and more spend 85%. It's becoming the hero of your own life. It's like you can still be a wonderful writer and like narration and like stories, but you when you sit down and write a story, my experience has been when I am more present in my life, which has been growing and growing over the years, when I sit down to write a song or I sit down to work on my book, it just comes gushing out of me because there's no stress and stuff. It's like if I, what I'm saying? It's like all these things that you create in your head really stifle the creativity. So, right. And so when you so what I mean by becoming the hero of your own story is there is a lot of dips and doodles in a person's life, even on a daily basis, if you're really paying attention. Maybe there's more, maybe around Christmas time, there's more excitement or, around the election or something happens where you get a new job there, that's more exciting. But even on a daily basis, things can be so beautiful when you're so present. That's why people love spending time in nature so much. It's like nature shows you how dramatic, one day can be in nature. And our life is really the same way.
It's so true. It really is. Especially too, I always think like whenever I'm outside, I care the least about what's going on in my head. Always. Like, I'm like, what? Like if I could just spend the majority of my hours outside, it's literally better because I can see, I also have so much more context. Like I can get such tunnel vision. My like most anxious, most monkey mind moments are when I'm like in a small room, just myself, and forget that there are so many people who are, living and surviving and not collapsing based on like one miscommunication, which is what I think will be the death of me, is like, and going back to what you said about being the hero of your own story, I think for so long, I really maybe wanted someone else to swoop in and grab hold and be like, I'm going to rescue you and I'm going to like carve out this path for you. And I waited and waited and waited. And I've only recently realized, like, since this is my own story, perhaps I should be that figure and not letting like small, what I would consider, like, I have a huge fear of like confrontation and, anything that's not agreeable, or I'm just a need to recover people pleaser. And I actually have made the most progress in these past 6 months, but it's so easy for me to just let someone else get under the spotlight and for me to be like, I'll just bend, for what they're saying and what their story is. Like, I will literally just get absorbed under their energy. And I realize that when I go into environments or social situations or work or even just the grocery store, like in my own self, without dragging along a bunch of thoughts and, just whatever's running in my mind, it's always a better experience. It's so different when I'm not, looking to hand it over to someone else, or it's night and day.
Well, and it sounds like you are fighting a narrative of not being worthy.
1000%.
Even just the comment you made earlier about, if I make one mistake, and that person writes me off. When the funny thing is, if that was actually the interactions that you were having with people, where you did one thing wrong and they wrote you off, that is not even remotely close to the relationship you would want to have on any level. So it really comes down to, we were just talking about this, about, the self-sabotage of your own worthiness.
Yes.
And I would imagine, and we're both very empathetic people, empathetic to dysfunction, I would say. And I have been at that point where, I'm going to bend over backwards for your comfort, for your spotlight, to take away any extra spent energy on your part. And then I'm going to let that eat away at me and chew me up and bring me to a point where I'm going to then blame you for doing that to me, when really I was the one who instigated that relationship, well, without setting any kinds of boundaries on how the relationship was going to. And you realize, it's like, holy shit, man, I have been living the most dysfunctional relationships by my own accord. And everybody else is like, I didn't even know you were feeling like that. Well, of course, I would never tell you, because that might bring up confrontation. And if I brought up confrontation, we might actually have to deepen our relationship by going through something. And that is the web and spiral of just absolute dysfunction that the ego has for self-preservation. And Corrine and I, we both have had the biggest growth in our relationship as friends, as mentors, and as now kind of spiritual companions throughout this insane life, by having some very difficult conversations and really butting into some hard things. And it took a lot of accountability, and it took a lot of being real and in the present moment. And thankfully we both had that to lean on each other, to have that presence of mind. But you're never going to grow that if you're only living in your head and in your story, and if you're not really having that real conversation and being a weirdo and going out and failing and falling on your face in these social events, and like, well, yeah, you really fucked up, but at least you were genuine and real. And now you don't belong there, or now you just made a bunch of friends.
Oh my gosh, that was to a T exactly what I am at that crossroads where now I need to choose to have, like, I stop exactly where you said, I don't want to get, like, I can't get any closer with friends because I'll have to get realer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sorry, like, I'm going to just decide what this is. And it's going to be your fault. And I'm going to have to bow out. And then I'm like, oh, weird. Like, that didn't work out. But then, and in my mind, it's like, well, she's not good at this. She's not very, I'm blaming her for all the things, of course, that I cannot accept in myself.
Right.
And then I have to, and of course I haven't, there's still hope for me and the person I'm talking about, but it is that point where I'm trying to push myself into that new phase of like, okay, I'm not going to just like call this off because I don't want to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation or be a little bit honest about what I'm actually feeling. And a lot of the old me was like, the oldish me was like, oh, sometimes it just doesn't work, and I would just use that as an excuse. Like, if it's supposed to work, it will. But I would do that. I'd play that card quite early, like I wouldn't give myself even a chance to show up like very authentically and say, this is actually what I was thinking. Or like, honestly, right now, it's as simple as like, I had spent almost every day with this one friend, and now it's been a day and a half because like, I just needed a small break. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure if we're friends anymore. And all I have to do is say, I needed a day and a half to hang out by myself. And that's what I previously have not felt strong enough to do, which is not an attack on either person. It's not, here's why we can't be friends because but I've already come up with those lists, of course, so I have them, but I'm not going to need them because there isn't that drama. But in my head, I'm like, oh no, she's not really as deep as I thought. And what a shame, but I am deeper. So sayonara. And I get her. And like, that's not it. It's actually the opposite. She's probably wondering, I'd love to have a conversation, but I'm like, I'm too scared. I've got to hide. I'm going to never bring this up. But you know what? This is inspiring me. I'm just going to say, I needed a few days. And because I'm so used to, oh, if they want to hang, like, I feel like I, wasn't a good friend because they couldn't hang out yesterday or didn't ask what they were doing. And it's like, the same broken record, whatever.
And now, am I correct? You grew up in the Midwest in Minnesota? Is that correct?
I grew up in Colorado.
Oh, you did grow up in Colorado. Okay.
Yeah.
Your family is kind of from Midwestern areas.
Yeah, my dad is from Minnesota. Yeah.
Because what you're describing, I'm from Wisconsin. I'm up in Wisconsin now, and there's this passive aggression that comes from it's this weird thing. It's hard to explain where it's like, I'm going to be disingenuous because I'm afraid to put pressure on a situation that actually needs me to put pressure on it to get better.
Totally.
So it's kind of it's this really strange idea where it's like, you're kind of being aggressive by not being honest.
Yes.
But it's a passive, it's in a passive way. I deal with that all the time and I played that same game where it's like, why can't I just say, I need 2 days of just some peace? Because I think it probably circles back to the unworthiness. I'm totally guessing and projecting on you, but I don't feel worthy enough to have a day or two from this person, because if I take that for myself, well, what are they going to think? Well, they might not think anything. What are you thinking? But, and ultimately it comes down to, it's like, what is so wrong with what I'm asking for anyways? And why don't I feel like I deserve it? Why don't I feel like the relationship deserves it? And why isn't at least worth the question of, is it worth it if I just take a couple days of break? But it's hard because it is our fault. It's our responsibility, not our fault. We are reacting to past causes. We are reacting to social dysfunction, familial dysfunction, in very subtle ways. And I think people are kind of, in a lot of ways, freaked out about talking about it, because you say, well, familial dysfunction sounds terrible. It sounds like major abuse is happening, but it doesn't. It can be dysfunction from a standpoint of the generations before us just weren't paying attention when they were designing their belief structures. It can be that simple. And that's not to say that all the belief structures are not serving. There are many things within our past, as you will probably find and uncover, or maybe have already found, that, oh, well, some of this shit works. Some of the core values really do work. And so it is about kind of tearing everything apart and then restructuring from the core of that legacy the things that actually help us grow, help our relationships grow, and help us become more aware of the connective tissue that exists between all of us.
That is, again, spot on. That's exactly what it is, because I do, it 1000% comes from a very low self-worth. And like you said, not necessarily like, gut-wrenchingly traumatic, just dysfunction that, passed as like, that's just, how we do things, or whatever. And now it's very obvious. Well, I'm actually doing a lot of these like deep theta state meditations where I go in to an early childhood memory. It's like 25 minutes and reprogram, like have a different figure tell me what I actually needed to hear that, 10, 20 years later causes me to be too afraid to say, I'm going to just take 2 days, like I'll text you on Wednesday or whatever. So I have to go in and actually like relive all the memories I have of being told, of thinking of adopting that belief, like I can't ask for this, that's not going to work out, I don't deserve this. And I've just started doing that, and it's so helpful. And it's amazing what I remember as being those like pins in the map, like they're so vivid.
Yeah.
And I always would sort of like, my mind I'd remember them, but not on the level that I really unpack them in these like deep imaginings where I'm like, that is where all of that came from, that one interaction.
Well, and that takes, this goes back to the Corrine's point about being the hero of your own journey. You're saying this, it is a profound thing what you're saying, but there's a deeper profundity. Wow, I got that one out right. There's a deeper profundity to what you're talking about. The bravery it takes to go back and sift over all of that, man. I don't want you to understate that. In just even diving into that now as a practice is very, very complicated, because essentially what you are going through is you're destroying all those safety markers, those safety nets of, well, I because you lived with that for so many years, that one programming point became a comfort zone because it was something you could count on to be true, even though it wasn't serving you long term. And when you go the deeper and deeper you go, that's probably been the most profound period of time, is raking over the very difficult questions and the difficult points in my childhood or in my adult life where I wasn't being present, where I wasn't being real, and really being honest with myself and being like, damn, that's why I do this now. You would think that what would happen is you'd be able to have something to blame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be like, well, I can blame it on this now. However, what I feel like what I've experienced is that I come out of that with a serious responsibility for all of my interaction with life, with well, yeah, that did happen, but I'm sure this person, this family member, parent, whatever, had no idea or any intention that when they were pushing that programming button, that was what was going to happen. That's the point. Is it comes from an unconscious experience that's not something that somebody's like really thinking. Well, if I do this to this person, is this going to happen? But when you pull out of that accountability and that real awareness of how important each of our interactions is with each other, you become very responsible for how you interact then moving forward. It's all very shifting. The butterfly effect is very real, and it is very impactful.
I completely agree. It is. And I used to think, I would hear, oh, like, think about your childhood. And I would just think very surface, like basic needs, and just be like, yeah, it was great. It was great. And now when I'm asked in these prompts, some of them are journals, some of them are like more meditations. I go right back to the clearest memory, I can just see the scene, and it's what used to be just a vague like memory and anecdotal and very like, oh, that was the time, they said this. Now it's like, just, it is so clearly a moment where I went one way and have been tracking along that for so long. And it's crazy actually, but it does feel great to reprogram those and to see, like you were saying, to feel that responsibility for the interactions I have now and want to show up to those in a very different way, instead of just like throwing the security blanket. Like, I can see what I've been hiding behind for so long. And I'm like, this from that time in like 6th grade, like it's almost like it's a little terrifying.
Well, I think you had a great word there, the programming. It's like we're these clean little slates when we're born, and then we learn a language, and then we learn not just a language, but we learn, instead of experiencing a glass of water, it's like, this is a glass of water. And as soon as we name it, it's like, it becomes the name of it instead. And so we have all this programming of our language and what we're taught to associate things with. And then we learn from our parents on how to act in our emotions. And, you guys are younger than I am, but I know my parents, most times when I start coaching with people, most people have the emotional maturity of like somebody who's 12. Like they don't mature, like they don't know how to deal with their emotions. They're not self-aware, like you've been talking about this whole conversation about being aware of your thoughts and aware of where it comes from. And so I love that word, the programming, because that's really what it is. And we can undo the programming. We can erase the hard drive. And that's what we do. To me, that's what meditation is every day, is not just cleaning the desktop off, but actually going into the hard drive and reorganizing the hard drive every day.
Well, and also to your point about, when you realize how sticky the programming is within yourself, and you realize how easy it has been for you to fall into traps for how many years, you start looking at other people and be like, man, I can't really judge them. I can't be upset with them. I can't really discount what they're going through right now, because I'm just as vulnerable to the traps that they're probably also, programmed in. These you start to become really compassionate as a symptom. We were talking about this as, empathy and compassion are symptoms of more and more awareness. The awakening process really brings those two out as symptoms, because you almost can't help it. If you're becoming more aware of your own story, your own bullshit, and your own programming, you can't help but become aware of, well, if I've been aware this whole time, and I've been this present, and I've been this thoughtful this whole time, and I'm still this malleable piece of clay that can be at the mercy of whatever in 6th grade, in 2nd grade, whatever. You really start to have immense compassion for everybody, because you're like, I don't even know what your thing is, but I get it. Like, that's just that, man. It's like, I get you could be going through something. Let's walk through it, man. Let's just get through it together.
Totally. I completely agree. The moments I'm the most true, like the moments I really feel the most self-worth, like when I get there and when I'm feeling that way, I have equally as much compassion for everyone else.
Yeah.
And it's it obviously nothing could feel better, but I can't get there authentically unless I feel great. So it's a lot of incentive to do the work because it's a bonus. But it's so true. And then you start to see how the variations are, subtle, and everyone has their thing, but it really is just a universal, it's a universal challenge, I guess, that we all have to just be our most authentic and not slip into the fake stories and the thoughts. And truly, it's almost obvious before someone even speaks where they are on that spectrum sometimes.
It is a spectrum. It's a spectrum, man.
For sure. Because, I've definitely teetered. Some days I'm better than others.
It's a process. I mean, it's conditioning in our life from the time we're children, but that comes from generations of conditioning. It didn't just happen in your generation, my generation. Our parents, like we've been kind of alluding to, are incredibly conditioned. And so that's why, obviously you can't blame anybody. People are constantly doing the best that they can from the state of consciousness and from the awareness that they're coming from. That doesn't mean we are around abusive people and that we allow ourselves to be around people we don't care to be around, but it just means that we have empathy and compassion for them. We don't judge them. I mean, because they're literally doing the best that they can. Like they believe some, wherever they're at in the spectrum, they're believing their story and have a big story. And that's what I work with a lot with people is asking them, is that true? The big story that they have about their, daughter-in-law or whatever. It's like, is that really true? And they're like, yeah, of course it's true. And I was like, well, is it really? You want to hold on to it.
If you want to realize just how very few things are actually true in this life, I encourage you to have an incredible mushroom trip and sit and talk with this person up at my top left, and just watch them just destroy the facade and the story over and over and over again. And you really begin to realize there is so little truth in this world as far as our story goes, our projections, our programming. But the few things that are true in life are so goddamn profound that you really start to, I have really started to try to discover those absolute truths, and there are certain things, that Corrine and I, we hit conversations where it's like we talk about this to the point where there's just nothing more to say. It is all real and it all isn't real. The awareness is the absolute truth. The presence in these moments is the absolute truth, and it gets really hard to articulate and really go further than that point, because the ego drama wants there to be more. Trust me, man, you are not the only person. She will laugh at me for another 10 minutes about how accurate it is that I am just as dramatic. The stories, the playwrights, the Shakespearean, it's a hamster wheel of just
epic
Shakespearean
proportions.
poetry. epic proportion. It is astounding how deep that goes. And I think at some point, what the funnest moment that I had realizing that was just being like, you know what? Okay, I love stories. I love the drama. I love just picking apart and breaking down every particle of something. And here is somebody else's perspective. And really, it doesn't even have to go anywhere. It doesn't have to be for anything but that. And realizing that that is also a part of me too, or that's a part of my experience or my projection, is loving the story. That's okay. What's not okay is attaching yourself to the story and being
Right.
convinced that the story is who you are. That is when it becomes, that's when it starts to
Great
spiral out of
distinction.
control.
Yeah, I was about to say that exact thing. Great distinction. Because I do sometimes, creatively, it is fun to see the story, but the separation from that. And it sometimes feels great to just, drum it up and then let it go. It's like that's almost a rush on its own, because it's like, or at least lately, that's been something where, because, I'm, at least personally, it's hard to not hear anything, of course. So I'll hear it. And then I used to really lean into it, see myself just like covered in the story, like honestly feel like it would feel like I was being suffocated under like a thick blanket, and now instead of being so consumed, it's easy to almost laugh at some of the details that I include. And then I always picture this like, bouquet of balloons and just running a scissor through the strings and letting all of the balloons fly off. Because it's like one of the only things I can imagine quick enough to just get to let go of the thoughts without getting
That's
tangled.
beautiful. And I encourage you, Erin, too, the let in this surrender process you're doing over the next couple of months and the cutting the balloons. There is a letting go. And then also, like I said, no matter how long you've been meditating for, because I've been meditating for 30 years and, the thoughts are still there. I just don't believe them. They're not as Velcro-y. Like, when you identify with your thoughts, when you identify with that circle of all the around the things, that's what you're saying about letting go of the balloons also. But it's okay if the balloons are there. You just don't believe them. You can just, you know what I'm saying? It's
Yes.
like, it's okay. Because the thoughts,
Yes.
that's the first thing people say when they start meditating is I have a lot of thoughts. Well, you always have a lot of thoughts. And you're going to, and that's, to get sick of yourself is the point of meditation, to get sick of your thinking, get sick of your thoughts, to realize, the Dalai Lama, Deepak Chopra, I mean, whoever you want to think of that's been Thich Nhat Hanh, they have thoughts in meditation. They just don't believe them. They don't follow them. They don't indulge in them.
Yes, that's another thing, a great thing to remember, because it's true. It's never quiet per se. It's just a belief in them that, or, not believing in them that is, it's so simple. It's not obviously very easy, but it is so simple. So we have that going for us.
I love that.
It is simple in concept. And that's why it's you can intellectualize it to the point where you get it, right? And it is simple in concept, but the practice and the walking of it in the day to day, and then not identifying with that intellectualization to the point where it changes how you behave in a unreal way, or in a, like you talk about, where it's like attaching yourself to these thoughts to the point where it could ruin a relationship that doesn't need to be ruined because of that. That's where it gets into the dysfunction. But yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. It's people say, well, how do you meditate? I'm not a meditation teacher by any means, but Corrine has taught me an immense amount about it and has been a huge help in that. And I kind of laugh about it now because people are like, well, how do you meditate? I'm like, well, all right. So first thing is sit comfortably, however you want, and then close your eyes and then breathe. And then like, okay, and then what? It's like, that's it. The rest is just a path that you walk forever, and you will discover all of the thoughts. And there's obviously more depth to that, and there's great practices, as far as breathing, awareness on breathing, or breathing practices, or mantra meditation. But ultimately, just sit and take time to be aware for a specific amount of time every day and reprogram that practice. And it is simple in concept, but it's very difficult in experience. Now, did I get that right? I feel
No,
like I
you
stumbled
did.
over
You
that
did
whole process.
fantastic.
Awesome.
You did fantastic. How's your meditation going, by the way? You're doing your...
Yes, I'm on like I want to say a 70-day streak. I need to check. I use Insight Timer to track it. I am on, a 71-day streak. So that's good. I usually go like 4 or 5 months and then maybe get, distracted. But I will say lately it's been good. Very, very, very consistent. And even if it's not as many minutes as I usually can get in, I will at least stop and really get extremely present, take like 10 deep breaths, anything to even if it's a small, practice, anything to strengthen the muscle, because otherwise I really am spiraling off. But it has been great so far. It's a long answer.
You may want to attend that meditation refresher course I'm doing next Sunday.
Yeah, I think I will, because I've been jumping around from different types, and I've been doing a lot of mindfulness work, and a lot of like, sometimes I'll meditate for 30 minutes, other times it's like 10 deep breaths. But I would like to do a refresher course, and I've been wishing, I could get more people together who want to meditate, because I love meditating in groups.
Yeah, it's nice.
I miss that. So I was doing that right before COVID. I found a place, but that's always such a
It's
treat.
nice. That's how I feel so blessed to. Two of the reasons why my meditation practice started off so strong when I was 27, when I first started, was, first of all, it cured my ulcer immediately. So that was a inspiration to meditate daily. And the second thing is, I was living with the guy who got me into meditation. And so we would sit together every day and meditate, and so that's why I've had a couple of meditation centers now. It is nice to have that support around you, hang out with like minds, have a reason to sit and meditate. But ultimately, the meditation path is a solo journey. Like, it's nice to have the support, right, but it is a solo journey. And this is a time where we do have to spend more time alone and look at all the wonderful things that have happened in your life with it. And, all the awareness that you've had and the practices you've had with the more alone time. And I know Sean is talking about how close his family unit, his 3 kids, and, the 5 of them have gotten. And I've certainly been a total freaking monk here at Ivy House, not seeing anybody and meditating 4 hours a day. And so sort of being where you're at, being okay with where you're at. So no, you don't enjoy meditating by yourself, but right now it's what I have to do. And there are some meditation groups on Zoom. Like, I've got my friend Sarah, she actually leads a meditation every day since the middle of March. They were doing 3 or 4 day, I think so I'll find that link and send that to you. And then I think next Sunday will help you as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Even just, a couple once a week, in Zoom meditation, it makes
just to have something, and even to talk about little things too. That's why I always used to have bliss days here and stuff, because different things come up on your journey, and you have questions, and so to plug in, and of course, feel free to ask me anything anytime, and we'll talk more Sunday. So I'm glad you're gonna do that. Yay.
Yes, I'm so
Good.
excited.
Well, Erin, I think we've chatted your ear off enough, and I've certainly loved listening to you. I love hearing about your journey.
Oh, thank you. I've had such a good time. This has been so wonderful.
Yay.
Yeah, man. No, this has been awesome. It's always good to talk to fellow journeymen, journey people. I didn't know how to have the gender neutral journey
peeps.
people and all that.
Fellow seekers. We're all seekers.
Fellow seekers. There you go. I tried and failed big time on that, but it's okay. But yeah, it is great to have, camaraderie in the experiences that we have, because I think a lot of people are dealing with the same issues. So, man, keep going. Yeah, that was great. I love your perspective. I like the mindful practices that you've started on your own, and congrats, man. Keep diving in.